and no one can prove such a thing. So those who do defend the problem of evil today have retreated from the logical version of the problem to the so-called probabilistic version of the problem, where the claim is that given the evil and suffering in the world, it's improbable that God exists, if not impossible.
I like how Dr. Craig here has to formulate this in a way that it makes atheists look like we're somehow admitting a loss on something and regrouping and figuring out how this evil issue is still fucking up their worldview. I mean, to suggest that atheists have somehow lost the argument, or that people critical of Abrahamic religions have somehow lost an argument here, is just peak straw man from Dr. Craig. I feel like it's kind of like one of those times where if you say something enough and you present it publicly to people and you refuse to acknowledge that what you're saying doesn't match reality, then you sort of make it a reality. Like, people just start believing that this is true. Like, nobody's using the problem of evil. It's been defeated on the logical front, and now they have to retreat to this particular offshoot of the problem of evil. I don't care how much Dr. Craig says that we've lost an argument. That's not going to make it true. But regardless of that, the probabilistic argument for God, I feel like, extends far outside the problems of evil and suffering. True, I think that the problem of evil and suffering does factor into a probabilistic argument for the God of Abraham, the Abrahamic God. But the argument about the probability of that God existing, it definitely includes a whole lot more illogical arguments or illogical things about the God, combined with the Bible in particular, because we're talking to Dr. Craig, a Christian. So, I mean, while the problem of evil does factor into that, I don't think that it's the only argument as far as like a probabilistic argument against the Abrahamic God. Because just for instance, if I were to make an argument based on how likely the Abrahamic God is to have existed or does exist, then I would probably pull from all of the illogical statements that the Bible makes, the fact that Genesis doesn't represent real history, the fact that the Israelite history contained in the Old Testament doesn't really comport with actual history that we know about, and then there's the New Testament that doesn't comport with the actual history of first century Palestine and everything. The fact that just all of these things that have culminated in me not believing in the Abrahamic God leads me to a probabilistic argument that this God probably doesn't exist. It's very unlikely that he exists, and the problem of evil and suffering is only a small portion of that.
And the difficulty with this version of the problem is that it makes probability judgments that are simply beyond our ability. There is no basis for thinking that if God has morally sufficient reasons for permitting the evil and suffering in the world, that these should be evident to me.
Now, for some minor types of suffering, or maybe minor types of evil, I guess by any kind of Christian standard, I feel like those are easily explainable by, oh, well, God could allow this to happen and, something good could come of it. Just because you're suffering a little bit or suffering some hardships or something like that doesn't mean that there isn't a good reason for it, or that there's some kind of good outcome that can't come from this, right? You learn something, you grow as a person. Just because you struggled in life doesn't mean that struggle is inherently evil or anything like that. I'm not expecting a utopia from God, but what I am expecting is needless suffering to disappear, or to not even be here in the first place. The fact that children are born addicted to drugs is a real big issue for me. The fact that there are kids with cancer. Why would God need somebody in the womb, knit together somebody in the womb, have the mother go through the pregnancy, give birth to the child, have the child live for a couple of years only to get bone cancer or any other kind of cancer or any other kind of sickness or illness? Why is that? If you're going to sit there and tell me that there's a good reason that child got it, that child had cancer, I'm going to need you to explain it. And you cannot just sit there and be like, oh, well, only God knows. I'm sorry, but I'm far more moral than your God if you think that there's a good reason for children to die at the age of 4 through a horrible disease like cancer or any other kind of genetic disease or illness. I mean, you're just not going to convince me that there's a good reason why that child had to suffer like that. That would be needless suffering. The fact that there are thousands of children that die of hunger. What is that? Like, why is that a thing that happens if this omnibenevolent God exists and he's all knowing, he's all powerful, but he's not powerful enough to give a kid a cracker, to throw a fucking peanut butter bottle and you know, at the feet of somebody that's hungry? Like, he can't do that. He can't manifest that. He just can't, you know, wiggle his nose and shake his dick and make that situation just not exist. Really? If you're going to sit there and tell me that God has all these properties that make him fantastical and awesome and something that should be feared, then you're going to need to explain to me why he doesn't do these things. Why he does do these things. Like in the Bible, in Numbers 31, why does he command the Israelites to go in and kill small children, specifically the boys, because they can't get pregnant? The prepubescent girls that haven't known the touch of a man, he obviously wants the Israelites to force them into sexual slavery. Yes, that is sexual slavery. Hey, here's another good question. Why does fucking sexual slavery exist in the Bible? That seems like unnecessary suffering to me. I feel like that is definitely something that this world can do without, and that God could definitely figure out a situation around that to where that just simply doesn't exist. See, I could go on and on and on for days with the number of problems that this omnibenevolent God produces when we consider the world that we live in.